uh, handouts that they need a handout for Ezra. We passed them out last week. You weren't here, so there you go. Yeah. We'll send you a bill for the extra one. Anybody else? I found it interesting. Open the book of Ezra. You come to that book in the Bible, Ezra, and the book right before that, right before you get to Ezra, is Chronicles. It tells us the Ezra began. What was going to happen, and at the end, first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord, by the Lord stirred up Persia. Kingdom. Was that proclamation? Anybody that wanted to leave could leave. And I looked at, isn't it interesting? For 30 years as captive, under the rule of Persian kings, first the Babylonian kings, but there they were. Anybody that leave, all would have left, but they didn't. And as we said earlier, or a couple weeks back, we were talking about in Ezra, not Ezra, but Nehemiah, when he left, same thing, leave. Not everybody left. Now the reason their lifestyle was, why they were living in captivity. How do you think the lifestyle was? Well, one thing, they had to be fairly well. Have gain, they had to have something that was allowing them to accumulate money. Because when those, what did they do? Gave them money, gave them things, gave them cattle, to take with them when they went back. Good. If life is good, what are you going to do? Stay with it. And going back to Jerusalem, what were they going to do? Well, they're going to be involved in building. They're going to build the altar. They're going to build the temple. They're going to build the wall. Back to work. And what would be the reward they were getting all along? Things are terrible. I mean, the city's in ruin, the temple's in ruin, the altars are in ruin. I want to leave the good life and go back to nothing. Now, I mentioned before, and I think it's worth again, although they came back on the first group with Zerubbabel, that they might have been old enough, and obviously they were, because when they laid out the temple foundation, as you read in your lesson, how did they react? At the end of chapter 3, if you've got that far. What's what? Yeah, some rejoiced and some were crying because they remembered how the temple was before, how it was, the grandeur would be. But if you went to a group, as here it's going to be limited, how big they could make it, because the king was supplying the materials, and they knew it wasn't going to be the same. And it said that there was rejoicing. And they couldn't tell from the sorrow and those that were happy. Just a mixed feeling kind of thing. So anyway, they're back. And again, it starts with the beginning. You know, they were going to be in captivity. How long? Somebody say. 70 years. And they were in captivity 70 years because they did not keep what? The year of letting the land be untilled. Every 7 years they were supposed to just quit doing it. No farming, no tree picking, no fruit. Just let it be. Well, they didn't do that. Year after year after year after year. And as we said before, when we looked at the years, they were in captivity 1 year for every year 70 years worth. They were in captivity, so not following the will of the Lord, 449 years. Now that seems like a long time to me. How about you? 449 years. Year to wait and to wait and to wait. The reason I mention that, we sometimes say, you know, we read those verses where time with God is like what? Nothing. That was about 538. And then here's Ezra comes along about how many years later? And you're thinking, well, I don't know. Well, if we read ahead, I'll just tell you, about 12 or 13 years later, you can see that in Ezra chapter 7. So he's coming along about 10 or 12 years later, and he's going back. Now think about this. Think about this. Zerubbabel went back. And what was the first thing he did? Deanna knows that answer because I told her. What's the first thing he did? Built what? The altar to God. And they offered sacrifices to God. For sin, for peace, for blessings. First thing built was the altar. Now to me, I find that significant. In that what did they want to do? Here they were, about 42,000, maybe if you count the service and the singers and the gate guards and all, about 50,000 people went back. And what is the very first thing they did? Built the altar and offered their thanks to God through sacrifice. Later, as you'll see, as we look at the lesson, they really didn't start working on the temple until the second year. And when they started working on the temple, give me a little idea here. Somebody give me an idea. When they started working on the temple, doing the foundation and laying things out, how did the people living there, not the Jewish people, but the people in the area, how did they react? Anybody? Yeah. We don't want you to do that. And I do find it interesting. Now, we did talk about Nehemiah. When he went to build, first off, the people wanted to help. And when he said no, that became in opposition. And they had to have armed guards. So here, the people that are looking at Ezra, or really Zerubbabel, let me get in line here, with Zerubbabel and the rebuilding and so on, at first the people come and said, let us help you with this project. Let us be involved. We'll make your God our God. Well, that wasn't accepted. And just like Nehemiah, when he rejected, they wrote letters to the king about what they were doing and what they shouldn't be doing. And of course, we know how that went. But the very same thing here, we'll see as we go along in chapters 1, 2, 3. Maybe later we'll see that when they started building, the people wanted to help. And when the help was not accepted, then they wrote letters to the king to prevent them from continuing. And the king wrote back and said, not only are they going to build, you leave them alone and make supplies, give them supplies to work. Interesting. So anyway, with that little background, let's take a look at the questions. They're very easy to answer. What prophecy of Jeremiah did Cyrus the king of Persia fulfill? What did you put down? The return of the people. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus to return the people. And again, he said, anybody that wants to go back, go. Well, they didn't all go. Really only 40-some thousand went back, but they sent things with them. He said, what command did God give to Cyrus? Now, not only for the people to go back, but what was the other command you find in verse 2? What did you write down? What was the command? What was he supposed to do? Build the house of God. I find that interesting. God didn't speak to one of the leading Jewish people of the day to build the house. He didn't say, make a little trouble here, make a little insurrection, have a little uprising in the community and go back. He spoke to the leader, spoke to the king, said, send them back and rebuild. And what did he do? Sent them back and gave them supplies for the rebuild and gave them orders about various kinds of things that they would need and that would be provided. So again, I put down here to send them back, I put down Jeremiah 25:12, and that's where it says that they're only going to be in captivity 70 years. And when the 70 years are up, they're back. So down here on question number 3, question number 3, what was to be given to the people returning to Jerusalem? And of course, as you read through there, what did you find, somebody? What did you have on your answer? Say it. Yeah. I kind of mentioned that in passing, that they had to be fairly affluent. They just weren't living in little dugouts. They weren't really, as I perceive, slaves of the land. They had an economy going on. And as you were saying, and I know you wrote down there, to support them with gold and silver and goods and cattle, and free will offerings to the house of God in Jerusalem. And you see that as you read in the verse, they were supposed to help with the building. Well, it's pretty simple. I just had a little side note here. They must have been living well in the land. Sometimes we don't think about that in their captivity, how their life was, but it must have been fairly well. I have part B in the verses 5 through 11. What did Cyrus give? What is it? Yeah, all the stuff. All the stuff. Now, this word, how are we going to say that? What is it? That's the one. That really is a Babylonian name that was given to who? And you're thinking, well, Brother Brandt, everybody knows that. That was a Babylonian name that was given to Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the Hebrew name, and this Shelzabaz was really a Babylonian name. Well, you'll see that as you read through the scripture. But what was happening? Well, all the articles that who took, as you read through that, who took all those articles? How did they come to be in the Babylonian Empire and then the Persian Empire as the king rules changed? Who did? Yes, Nebuchadnezzar took all of that stuff. And I find it interesting, after all of those years, there it is. He says, get it out, give it to them, let them take it with it. Well, and they did. But what didn't they take with them? What's not mentioned? Of all the religious things, all the religious artifacts, the bowls and the cups and the plates, and what didn't they have? They did not have the ark. Gone. Never to be seen after they left Jerusalem under the captivity of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. What happened to it? That is the question. Pardon? Yeah. Now I'm not one to confirm, but there's a group in Ethiopia that they claim to have the ark. Now, whether they do or not is immaterial. Nobody's ever seen it. It's what? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. But the thing is, if it was needed, where would it be? It would have been sent back with them. If Nebuchadnezzar had it, it would have been sent back. But wherever it is, or not, now can you think of any reason why nobody would want to pick it up? Yeah, we have those examples of where only certain ones to do that, and when the wrong ones did it, guess what? There were problems. So anyway, the ark is gone as far as we know, and it's one of those things when we get to heaven, we can ask, what happened to the ark? Yeah, sure enough. But I think if we're in heaven, we won't need to have those kind of answers. I sometimes be talking to people say, well, Paul said it. When I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Paul what he meant by that. Well, why not ask God what he meant by that? Because the scriptures, they're inspired by, but that'd be another lesson. Anyway, so they took back all of the things that they had, all the things that were sent back, and that was the plan, that they should do that. That was, after all of that time, they were still there. So, number 2, under part B, who went with? That's a hard word to say. It would be so much easier to say what? Zerubbabel. I can say that. But anyway, we know who that is. But in verse 5, it gives us an answer. Who went with him? Who went with to Jerusalem? I had verse 5. Yeah, I don't know exactly when I say about they didn't all go back, which is obvious. I don't know why they didn't all go back. But as you read verse 5, who did go back? And I put down, everyone the Spirit of God stirred up to go. I find that interesting. Now, there were 42,000 of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, and there were the servants and the singers and the gate guards and those things. But out of all of those, the Spirit of God stirred them up. How did he do that? Did he feel you tapping on the shoulder? I want you? But anyway, that's what we have written in the scripture, verse 5. And then down under C, about the census and the returning of the people in chapter 2. Why is the census preserved for us? When we read down through there, who was related to who, and the son of this, and the son of this one, the son of this one, the son of this one. I mean, all the way down through until you get to the 42,000 people. Why was it important to have the census so we knew who belonged to who? Anybody? The lineage of Christ. And as you look at it in Luke, chapter 3 and verse 22, and you look at it in Matthew chapter 1, verse 12 and 13, you'll find Zerubbabel right in the middle of all that. And then, of course, it says the others down to the time of the birth of Christ. But it's interesting that he's involved in that. He's one that's the descendant of David, those kind of things. But we have that so we know. And again, I say it again, it was nice, it was interesting. It's preserved that people could look back, even in the day of Christ, could look back and see who they were related to. Yes?
Also, this time it was for them to know who the Levites were, who served the temple, the priests.
Yes, that's right. They needed to know who the servants, who the Levites were, who the priests were, and there's even a little outline here of those they couldn't actually serve because they couldn't find any genealogies for them. They just were serving, I guess, and said, okay, you can do this and you can do this, but when they checked the lineage, they didn't belong. So they didn't serve after that time. But it gives us the outline of where they belong. So when you read that about those that were put out or not kept, in order to serve, you must be a Jew and be able to show it. Now, I've said it maybe another time, but now they had to keep records while they were in captivity, obviously, or they wouldn't have known anything 70 years later. And all the time, till Christ came, they knew who was related to who. But when the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, just down to the ground mostly, and they used the rubble to make a causeway out to one of the islands, gone. And the records were kept at the temple. When Christ was born, they went to the temple to register what? His birth and his lineage. And up until the time of the temple was destroyed, you could go and check anything. It's gone. Why is it no longer needed? Why don't we need a lineage of the Jews any longer? What is it? All nations. I like that. See, it's no longer limited. Who can be a Christian? Anybody. And what is it? Yes, all Christians are priests. They're from 2 Peter. So we don't need to have a lineage. Really, the lineage ends where? I'm baptized into Christ, raised up to walk in newness of life. Whose child am I? God's. I'm not some lineage. Now, I might be able to look back and, the fellow that baptized me back there in 64, but really, it's not him and me and then God. It's me and then God. All of that's gone. Who knows what your relationship is with God? Who knows what that relationship is? God. God knows. Who else knows? You. I like that, Nancy. You know. Now, sometimes, my mouth is so dry, sometimes a person will be in the assembly, be involved as much as anybody else, and then for whatever reason they begin to think about the time that they obeyed the gospel. They look back and, well, maybe they were at a youth camp when they were a teen, and there were 4 or 5 that were being baptized, and they said, well, I better too. But they look back on that activity and that experience and think, well, I'm just not sure that I did it for the right reason. It's like, I'd have Bible studies, and they would say, well, I need to ask my father. Or you're talking to a lady, and they say, well, I need to ask my husband. Okay, what if your husband says, nope, I don't want you to be baptized. I don't want you to get involved with that. So you're not. Well, obviously you're lost. But what if you go to your husband and your husband says, yes, dear. I think that would be great if you would be baptized and become part of a religious group and sort of turn your life around. And well, here's the question. Did they obey Christ or obey their husband? What do you think? If they had to ask their husband and the husband gave the consent, I'm not sure that they obeyed the gospel. And I've known ladies that have come with that very thing. You know, when I obeyed the gospel, really, I had to ask my husband, and he said it was okay, so I did. But looking back on it, I'm not sure that I have done the right thing. Well, here's the deal. If some years ago you obeyed the gospel in correctness, that was with the right understanding and the right purpose and the right heart, and you know, everything was correct just like it should be, and nothing was amiss in your understanding and what you were doing and the reason you were doing it. So all those years ago, however that was, when you were baptized and raised up to walk in newness of life, God added you to his church, his family. So if you were to come and say, I'm just not sure, and we baptize you today, but really 30 years ago everything was correct, what's happening today? I like that. That's the words I use. Just getting wet. But here's the deal. What if 30 years ago it wasn't right? You were really obeying your parents or obeying your husband. And the thought, well, okay, so 30 years ago what happened? You just got wet. So today, what's happening? You're obeying the gospel in truth. It's a no-lose situation. If there's ever any question, if there's any question in your mind, well, then be baptized for correctness. Be a terrible thing to be lost, wouldn't it? Anyway, but they had the census to know about those things, about Christ and his lineage and that kind of situation. It says, why were some men excluded? Now we have that in, why was that? As you read down through about the priests. Why were some excluded? What is it? Not on the record, not in the lineage. And let me say again, they were serving as priests. Did they know the truth? Were they doing the right thing? Did they intend the right thing? Absolutely. But were they actually looked at that weren't the right people? Regardless of what they thought, it doesn't make it right. And the same as I'm saying about questionable baptismal situations. Just thinking it's right doesn't make it right. We need to know that it's right. So don't be in question. So not on the records is what I had on mine. Not on the records. Not found in the list. Well, page number 3. Well, this has to do with what was the number of the whole assembly? Who put down something? The whole assembly. Yeah, 42,300. And then we also had female servants, 7,337. They knew who they were. And then they had singers. You talk about having a choir. How many singers? It says 200. Later there'll be additional singers that come out on the next time around. But the singers, both men and women among the singers. I guess we need to have some bass voice. Who has a bass voice? Yeah, Need to have the base. So anyway, but it's listed. It's listed. And we're looking at this, with Ezra, and very shortly they will be able to read this, looking back a generation or two. When I think about my great-grandmother, I know she lived on a farm down near Portsmouth, Ohio. And get this, there was a road that went around. You would come up and right up past her house and turn and you would be right there by the barn. But if you came up to the front of the house and decided that you were a visitor, I don't know what that, but there were 91 steps up to the front of her house. I think it'd be better to walk around the road. But anyway, I remember that. I remember we'd go there and we'd have dinner. And when the dinner was over, the plates were collected and ladies met in the kitchen and did whatever they do to get those things washed up. But I always found it interesting. Here are the plates of food, the meats, the potatoes, the beans. And they just took a cloth and just covered that up. I see Nancy shaking her head back there. That's just what they did. And in the evening, what did they do? Just took the cloth off and passed out the plates. Yeah. So anyway, but you remember things. And I remember my grandmother, right? And things that was involved that she did and different things. And to me, she was always old. She always had gray hair. She always wore a very straight dress. Kind of always walked stooped over a little bit. But I remember her and things that, she would make bread because my grandfather couldn't have salt. So she made bread, and when the bread was made, she made little rolls, and then she'd make little soft cookies, and so I enjoyed that. And I remember when she first lived in the house on Maynard Avenue, that instead of having spigots, there was just a little pump, and you pump the water up, and you wanted hot water, you put it on the stove. And it was really a great time when they got the plumbing in there where they had, you could have the water. I remember Deanna talking about her aunt when it was in Zanesville. Didn't they always have the pump in the basement that she had to get the water? Yeah, but you remember things. So but see, that's not written down. When I pass, that'll be lost. But there are those organizations that want you to say things, and they record all of that. But a couple generations later, you have all the genealogies. You have who the priests were. You have the lineage of all those that were involved. So when we look a few generations out, they can see where they fit. They can see, this is my lineage, these are my people. And if you weren't in the right lineage, what happened? They put you out. So again, on page 3, 42,000. And we know that there's more because when Nehemiah comes out, if this is around 512, 511, and Nehemiah comes out somewhere in the 440s. So we're looking another generation or two. He comes with another 45,000, but they can look back and see where they were. Question number 2 under that section, the return is completed. What was ordered? What was offered at the house of the Lord, and why? What was offered? What happened when they finally got there? Verses 68 and 69. What is it? Yeah. The offering, free will offerings in the house of God to be restored. They offered gold and silver and garments. Now they mentioned the priestly garments several times. It's interesting that they had priestly garments. It's interesting that they had gold and silver, but they offered that. I sometimes think Why? What was their reason for going back? Why did they go back? They went back with Zerubbabel. Why did they go back? What were they going to do when they got there? They're going to be building. And again, let me say, the ones that went back, they didn't all go back, but the ones that went back, why those people? Well, we already looked at that verse. God stirred their heart to do the work. And they went back knowing that they were going to be building. I don't have any outline. There's nothing in the scripture that says this group of 442, they're carpenters. This group of 637, they're masons, doing the cement work. This group of 1,040, they are those that repair the roof, build the roof. I don't know if that's how that worked. Have no idea. But it's interesting, when they got to do the building, who was there? Builders. Builders. So did God stir up the hearts of those that needed to go the first time? I think so. He stirred up the hearts of those that were going to be needed in doing the building. Interesting. I find it interesting. So anyway, there they were. As you look into chapter 3, and really I think we'll not start there, just make some comments. Pardon?
I like it in verse 69 where it says, when they gave according to their resources.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that they demanded more from some family or another. It was just
I think so. Yeah, I didn't say that. I have that written down here as according to their ability. Yeah. Does God know? He's talking about they gave according to their resources. And he's saying that maybe they weren't all on the same level, that they all didn't leave with 300 pieces of silver and 200 pieces of gold. They had different resources. And isn't that the way it is today? Isn't that the instruction that we have today? And even in giving a tenth, under the old law, even in giving a tenth, could my tenth be different than your tenth? I think so. Not everybody had the same thing. Well, isn't it kind of the same today? How is our giving worked out? I know it says liberally, cheerfully, sacrificially, but as you prosper, as you purpose, as you prosper, then you give such and such. And I've said on other occasions, think of the Jews. I'm sorry, my mouth is so dry. But think of the Jews before Christianity. All of their life, they were given 10% some years, 20% some years, and other years, 30%, just depending on what the law required. But just deal with the 10%. The least they ever gave was 10%. So when they became Christians and they were making offerings to the Lord, liberally, cheerfully, sacrificially, as they planned, as they prospered, I just can't imagine that they would give less than what they've been giving all of their life. I can't imagine they would say, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm a Christian now. I just need to give 2%. You wouldn't think that, would you? If you'd always been giving 10% and now you're going to give sacrificially, we have the account in the scripture of that where it says that very thing. But I think if you'd always been giving 10% and now you're going to give sacrificially, that you give more rather than less. But that'd be a lesson for another time. So here we are, looking, and we'll start chapter 3 next time and move into chapter 4. We didn't look at all the word by word of genealogies. But by the time, as we mentioned in Nehemiah, And we had the group that came with Zerubbabel, and then we have a group that comes some 70 years later with Nehemiah. He brings another 40-some thousand, and they list both from what came with Zerubbabel and what came with himself. And it lists, when you put that together, about 85,000. And as you looked at that list in Nehemiah, remember it listed the heads of the families. 84 are mentioned. 84 are mentioned. Remember how they had those who were head over 1,000 and heads over 100 and heads over 50 and heads over 10. So the heads over 1,000 of those groups, with 84 that are mentioned, that would be, the 1,000 group. Isn't it interesting that it works out to be about 84,000 people? Amazing, isn't it? The records are interesting as they look back on them. Anyway, so we'll come up with chapter 3 next time and chapter 4. So just go verse and read, see, and add some things as you study along. But it is interesting as we move into chapter 3. They start to celebrate the old feast days. We see them with the new moons. We see them with the Feast of Booths, which means camping out in little thatched accommodations, 7 days, offerings and celebrating and those things. But they begin to do the things that the Scripture has taught. Now, over in captivity, why couldn't they do that? Because they were in captivity. They couldn't do all the things that they knew to do. But as soon as they were back at a situation where they could do them, first thing they did was make offerings. Next thing they did, they're having the Feast of Booths just a little while later. They're doing what they knew to do all along. Sometimes maybe we need to look back and see how we're doing. Be a terrible thing. Yes?
They also had good captivity.
Had what?
When they went to captivity, it was because they were following.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, he's saying they went into captivity because they weren't doing what they should be doing. It's why they went in captivity. And now that they're out of captivity, guess what they're going to do? What they should be doing. It's a good point. A good point. All right. I'm through. I didn't hear the bell. Is that how it goes? 3 minutes? 2 minutes? 1 minute? I'm getting the heads up back there. All right. So next week, chapter 3, chapter 4. And again, I know it's very similar in things we talk about because Nehemiah came back those years later and begins to do the same thing in building the wall. As I said earlier, it met the same resistance. Same people wanted to help. When he didn't let them, they wrote letters to stop them. Anyway, Ezra. And the closing comment. There it is. I'm sorry you don't have time for a comment. See you next week.
Copy of the information on the gates of Jerusalem.
On the dates of what?
The gates of Jerusalem. I think you handed one out last week.
I have one.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
in the other car. So
The gates.
You had one last week.
Yeah, I'll get you one.
Okay,
Yeah.
please.
The information about the gates?
Yes.
Yeah, I can do that.
Something interesting, the comment was made about the Ark of the Covenant being taken to Ethiopia. Ethiopia.
Yeah,
On Sunday night on 60 Minutes.
I saw that.
You saw that? Wasn't that interesting?
Yeah. But I think it's even more interesting that nobody has ever seen it.
Yeah.
They have one person, there's one person that guards the ark. And nobody goes in. I mean, he's there, she's there, depending on the situation, but only one person at a time. And nobody sees it. So I don't know what he's guarding or she's guarding, but obviously there's something in there, but I can't think it's the ark.
No.
But they got something they want to think.
They think it's important anyway.
Yeah, that was nice on 60 Minutes.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yes.
I want to say to you, really, truly, I believe that everyone should know the date, the year that you was baptized.
Oh, yeah.
Because you should know that. If you don't, you better search.
Yeah.
Because it's not right.
Yeah.
I remember mine was May 21st, 1975, 47 years ago.
Yeah. Well, mine would,
Remember that?
yeah.
You should know that by heart, because you know what? And I deal with this. I do not know the part of the Holy Spirit that God gives to each one of us. But learning with the Word, studying the Word, meditating and praying, you have a more better vision of God's Word and the Holy Spirit lead you.
Yeah.
I truly believe that. Without that, we don't gain it.
Yeah. Yeah. Mine's easy to remember because it was Easter Sunday in 1964.
Right.
Not that we made any special thing about that. That's just how it worked out. Somebody left their purse here. You know who that is?